And as the U.S. naval blockade continues, Iran has increased its railway shipments with China in an effort to mitigate the blockade's devastating effects on its economy. Joining us now is political analyst Rod D. Martin, founder and CEO of Martin Capital, to discuss. Rod, how effective could rail be to mitigate the U.S. naval blockade, which has been very effective?
Well, it can't be very effective. That's exactly the point. There is a rail line from Xi'an to Iran, traversing Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan. It is not meaningless by any means. And the Chinese built it as part of the Belt and Road Initiative in 2014 with significant upgrades last year. But at best, we're talking about handling about 6% of Iran's exports. This is not a huge number. And, you know, an oil tanker can carry a couple million barrels. A specialized tanker train would only carry about 70,000. So this is a far cry from solving their problem. Incrementally, of course, it helps, but even there, it doesn't help as much as it sounds like, because the cost to transport by rail is about 40% higher than to do so by sea. It's a little bit quicker, but it's a whole lot more expensive. And you may rest assured that the Chinese are going to pass along those costs to Iran.
Now, it seems like Iran's regime is playing the waiting game against the U.S., knowing that the longer it takes, the more political pressure that the president feels. So even though it's only 6% of the volume via rail, is it enough for the U.S. to say it's just elongating the regime's survival and we need to do something about this rail evasion, because these are sanctioned goods? We see them taking action on the sea against sanctioned goods from China that have dual use. Should they also take action against rail?
Well, we probably will. I mean, it really depends on if the ceasefire survives. And, you know, the president was saying that it is on extreme life support yesterday. I think that may be being generous. The ceasefire exists in part to buy time and reset on the War Powers Act. It exists in part to give the appearance of negotiating with people we know can't be trusted and we know won't keep any deal they do make. And they haven't even offered a deal that is something we could consider. And further, it's time to get more naval assets into the region to finish this. So if hostilities commence again, and I'm pretty sure they will, if that should happen, these rail facilities are the easiest thing in the world to attack. And you can say, well, it's absolutely true that during World War II, even with much lower technology, various powers attacked each other's rail lines, and those rail lines were back in service pretty quickly. And that's absolutely true. But they didn't have our level of technology. They certainly didn't have our capacity to just really mess with someone's day. So if we keep hitting the terminals in question or key rail lines at key points, we can pretty much eliminate this as a meaningful source of funding for the regime. And I think that's exactly where we're headed, in much the same way as the blockade has almost completely cut off the ability, not just for Iran to ship oil out of its ports, but for Iran to move tankers into its ports to increase storage capacity. And that's really the key. Everybody's got to understand, at a certain point, you run out of storage capacity. And when that happens, you don't just flip a switch on your oil fields. They actually have to stop pumping. And shuttering an oil field is a complicated process, especially when you have older fields, older tech, and some of those fields may never come back online.
Wow, you said a lot of very interconnected elements to the situation. Fascinating that you said the ceasefire exists to reset the 60-day clock on the War Powers Act. Of course, President Trump about to get on his plane this evening, I presume, for his meetings on Thursday in Beijing. So, and of course, what we're talking about is getting dual-use capabilities from China. So how does Trump's visit to Beijing play into the calculus of all the things you just described?
Well, part of this has been to squeeze Beijing. And actually, the Epoch Times has a wonderful article up yesterday by Terry Wu, who's just a fantastic writer, talking about exactly that. This puts a squeeze on Xi in a way that forces him to really think twice about squeezing us on rare earths. And the truth is, as strongly as the president has acted to build up our capacity, not just to produce, but to refine rare earths. Remember, the real bottleneck there isn't Chinese production, it's Chinese refining. They refine about 92% of the world's rare earths. We even ship them rare earths that they refine. We have to actually build that capacity, and we are. There's a new plant in Texas that is online and being expanded. And we've got deals with lots of allies, including Australia and the Ukrainians, and that's part of what Greenland is about. So we're absolutely looking to get weaned off of China here. But that doesn't mean we are weaned off. It's going to be several years, 3 to 5, before we can really do without Chinese supply. And during that time, we have to convince Xi Jinping that he can't do without us on oil.
Do you think that the fate of the meetings with Xi have anything to do with what will happen with Iran? Does Xi have that amount of power, or are they just sort of friends of convenience, Beijing and Tehran?
Well, you're right to say that. BRICS is kind of a joke, and the Indians broke it pretty irreparably back in February when they signed a trade deal with us, and then 3 days later started interdicting shadow fleet oil tankers, in that case carrying Russian oil. This is a Potemkin village in the truest sense. So is China going to help Iran meaningfully? Well, they haven't yet. What have they sent Iran? Where are the ground troops? Where are the fighter jets? Where are even the fighter jets sold to the Iranian Air Force? The Chinese have consistently refused, as have the Russians, to sell the Iranians modern equipment of that sort. Now, they'll sell them air defense capability that we just destroy with impunity. But fighter jets, their modern stuff, the same stuff they're selling to Pakistan, no dice. Absolutely won't do it. And actually, after the 12-day war last year, the Iranians went to them again and, hat in hand, give us your best fighter jets. And the Chinese just laughed at them and said the Israelis will have them blown up before they arrive. So there's absolutely nothing China's meaningfully going to do for them, except at the margin. They may ship them some missile fuel. They may help them with this replacement for oil tankers of maybe 6% of exports. They're going to do some things at the margin, but it's only at the margin. And the prime relationship for Xi Jinping this week especially is making sure that the trade war doesn't escalate with the United States. We are the dominant and absolutely essential consumer market for a Chinese economy that has doubled down on exports as its future. They have to work with us. The only question is the details, and those are going to be sticky and difficult as long as we're dealing with China, because they're good negotiators and they have their own interests in mind. But these guys have to work with us. Iran is almost a sideshow.
Always a lively discussion. Very much appreciate your analysis. Rod D. Martin, thank you.
And you.